Welcome back to the Patriots Den. My name is Nathan Bigelow. I'll be your host here today because Patrick is out on spring break. Much needed rest for him. So he'll definitely be back with you guys next week. But I want to welcome in the co-host, Brian Fuentes.
Howdy, y'all. How y'all doing?
Absolutely. I'm doing pretty good myself. I want to thank you and Patrick for allowing me to come and host the show with you guys. I've been watching you guys and I love what you guys do and talk about. But I know that this week's been pretty busy. There's a couple different information that's coming out that's rather interesting. I know that you had mentioned to me earlier about the whole Kash Patel and the activities he's been on. So, what have you seen this week from him?
Yeah, no. So, with Kash Patel, if to the listeners of our show, we've been pretty active on following his story. Well, now that he's finally in office, we've seen that he's been quick to actually get to work, and he's been, I believe it was a FEMA, official high in FEMA, who's been indicted for the whole money. I wouldn't say money laundering.
Yeah, I know that she was trying. It was a director in the Borders and Customs, and she was trying to defraud the FEMA program because in the state of Michigan, she was specifically in the Detroit area. And what happened is during that time, during a specific time period, there was massive flooding in that area. Well, I guess that, it affected her home in somehow. And through that process, she was taking money and it didn't apply to her, essentially. So she was going through that. So I know that they had announced that they're bringing criminal charges on her. So I don't know. I don't know too much about the details, but you may know a little bit more than me on that.
I wish I did, but it's, it's a small story, really.
All right.
Kash Patel getting to work, that's really the main thing. I'm happy to see it, frankly, just because a lot of the times we see these big names get into power and then they just do nothing. They have the title, do news conferences, don't really do much of a job, but, less than a few weeks in and we're already seeing some big arrests, so I'm happy to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there's been conversation, kind of like gearing this towards another area, but with Kash Patel, when it comes to the whole Epstein list and whatnot, I know a lot of people have been, like what you were saying, they kind of get in these positions and don't do anything. A lot of people have been looking at Pam Bondi, and it's like, what are you doing there, Miss Pam Bondi? But I know Kash Patel has spoken a little bit about it, and they are currently working through the thousands of pages that finally dropped from the New York FBI agents building itself. So what is your whole take on that? I know we've never talked about it.
Well, I kind of put Jeffrey Epstein and the JFK files together because they're very similar in the fact that a lot of people want to see what's on them, but they've never dropped.
Right.
And my thing is, drop them. There's no reason not to.
Absolutely.
At least for the common American. I understand some elites might be not too happy that their names are on one of these two documents, but that's irrelevant. We all want to know, A, how one of our presidents got assassinated, and B, how one of the most powerful men that lived, a few years ago, he's a billionaire, all these connections, just died in really suspicious circumstances, and then not only that, but his connections and who was connected to him still unknown to us with certainty. So
now I know a lot of the left has been pushing for it as well because they're just dying to see Donald Trump's name on this list for whatever reason, even though, in my opinion, if his name's on the list, his name's on the list. Let's go after him, even as a sitting president. But I don't think he is, because in all reality, they've had this information the last 4 years. They've known about it. If Donald Trump's name was in any connection to it, it would have dropped.
Exactly. You saw this with the FBI raids of his home earlier in the Biden administration, or the countless, court cases he was in. If his name was truly on that list, I guarantee they would have dropped it.
Oh,
obviously not all of it, but it would have been redacted enough to where you could see Trump was on there, but no one else.
Right. Which is why the left only brings up the whole flight logs and everything when it comes to his connections back in the 80s, talking about how he was his best friend and all this other stuff. But they tend to ignore the fact where those flights were to and from his home in New York and Florida, and the fact that during the 90s, he literally banned him from all casinos and resorts that were Trump associated. Yeah. So I love it when they only hyper focus on specific areas of big, massive things like this. But I really do have questions of why it's taking so long to look at this information from Pam Bondi, because honestly, in my opinion, they gave us a promise of day one, right? Now I understand when it comes to the whole situation of not having all the documents, I can give leeway for that, right? Because obviously the New York FBI building was completely corrupt. And that time period between Christopher Wray and Kash Patel being, the intermittent, God only knows what happened during that period of time. So it's one of those issues of like, okay, I give you a little leeway, but here we are 2 weeks later. You've had the information. Why aren't we seeing anything about it?
I mean, it's as simple. I think me and Patrick talked about this a few weeks ago. The people's names are on those lists. People on both the left and the right, unfortunately, or else it'd be a very easy tool for one side to use those, documents already. And that's really the issue. I mean, not only politicians, but a lot of big names in business and finance. So all these sponsors first said politicians are also on these lists. What's going to happen? Oh, well, if this guy gets arrested, I'm going to start losing on these, lobbying checks from me and my campaign. And I'll have another incentive to not release the files. The one that I can't get on, though, is JFK. Like, why haven't they released that one?
That is a very interesting one. Now, when it comes to the whole JFK situation, that is one of the issues that has to do with government agencies, and a lot of people don't know it. And the conspiracy of how they linked up and made that possible, unfortunately. And that's where you're going to really see where the FBI, the CIA, agencies like those specifically, the level of corruption dates back farther than even the 60s when that occurred. So I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of that unless there's going to be the promised transparency that they claimed that they had during this Trump administration. Now, I'm an individual that voted for him 3 times, right? But I'm also an individual that is understanding that, politicians tend to overpromise and underdeliver a lot of the time. So I'm going to hold them accountable in this regard, just because when you promise something to me, I take every single one of your words and run with it. But I guess we'll see how that goes. I know that, this week is a big week because tomorrow is this impending governmental shutdown. I know that a lot of people have been paying attention to it and seeing the back and forth between the Republicans and Democrats, even in the House, and it's sitting in Senate right now. What's your take on it?
I mean, it's going to happen, unfortunately. The government is, as Patrick and I said, it's theater right now. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of doing things for the cameras. I mean, you had this with a lot of Democrats going outside federal buildings to protest Trump. I'm like, this isn't what you should be doing with your time. You're paid a lot of money to be there, unfortunately. And instead of, trying to help your people out, get bills to help your constituents, you're out here protesting, calling Trump and Musk Nazis or whatever they're saying nowadays. The shutdown is just a part of that whole charade where they play government. I mean, like always, they'll resolve it somehow. In the end, I believe Americans are going to get the short end of the stick since they don't really see the need to serve the Constitution anymore, just because the average American doesn't care about, 1 or 2 bills being passed. They only care about the big headlines about, oh, wow, tax on tips. You'd think that would be all over the news. People would care a lot about that. It affects a lot of Americans, but no. No one else knows unless you're deep into politics.
Right.
And I think that's the current trend in American politics, where the average person doesn't care, and by extension, the politician cares even less about these issues.
Right. And I can see it from the Republican side, is that the whole situation is, hey, let's keep the government going so that way we can take a look at these issues and make sure that these extra bills, like no tax on tip, no tax on overtime, there are single issue bills that are presented out there, but they can't go forward with making those possible if the government's shut down.
Exactly.
So that's where the position of the Trump and all the other Republicans outside of Thomas Massie are sitting, saying, hey, let's take a look and see, what we can do to keep the government open, so that way we can continue this fight, and then through a reconciliation bill, we can address those issues of Doge. Well, there's an inter-party fight between a massive following of Thomas Massie, as most people know by now, and the rest of the Republicans. Because Thomas Massie is an individual that's, honestly, in my opinion, I kind of agree where he's coming from. Mm-hmm. In the sense that, he's continuously over the last year or over the last 2 years, really, that the Republicans have held the House, saying, hey, we keep doing these CR bills or these continuing resolution bills, but we're not making any adjustments to it, even though that's what we keep promising. We keep talking about reducing the spending. We keep talking about defunding areas that are absolutely nonsensical, but yet we never do it. And there's this big contention between him and Donald Trump right now, especially on social media, because he automatically said, no, this is not doing what we promised the American people. It's not taking into consideration the Doge finding. It's not taking into consideration the Festivus report findings. And you guys aren't doing enough to address what Trump ran on. So it almost seems like Thomas Massie is more of a Trump follower than even Trump is at this point.
Well, it's politics for you. I mean, Massie is right on the issues. I agree with you. I mean, it's very simple. We know where the money can be cut. We know what needs to be passed. As you said, tax on tips and overtime, that should be single issue passed with no issue. But it's all being bundled together. And for that reason, I mean, it's being not passed, frankly. It should have been like first month, should have been done. Right. But unfortunately, due to politics being politics, it's not being done. And I mean, I hope that it gets sorted out, but I mean, shutdown happens tomorrow. I doubt this is going to get averted, unfortunately. So,
that's been basically said by Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, at this point, it's just to see how long they'll play this charade for. I mean, I hope it gets done quickly. A lot of Americans would benefit from no tax on tips or overtime, even the Doge findings. I mean, I remember reading a report earlier that our deficit is still growing. It's not shrinking despite Trump's claims. By how much it's growing or shrinking, it's up in the air, but it is growing regardless. And if we still have a deficit under this administration, combine that with the trade war we're doing, the economy is not going to be doing very well. So they really need to get their stuff in order, or else the economy and by extension the American people aren't going to be doing very hot.
Right. And if that was the case, I would definitely be in. But you got to think of it from a business mindset, and that's what Donald Trump's doing, which is why I love it, in the sense that, I know that Thomas Massie has his contentions, and I'm right on board with him. And he basically reiterated what he did back in August. Sitting in the committee, he reposted a video of him talking about it. It was like 7 minutes long. You can go onto his Twitter page or X page and see this video, because it's the same contentions of, hey, we keep kicking the can down the road because Republicans keep saying, hey, we're going to pass this bill so that way we can fight later in regards to making sure we make these cuts. But it's, again, like them just continuously kicking the can down the road, and he's finally had enough. Because a lot of people will sit there and try and, say he's just voting against Trump and all this other things. Is like, when you take a look at his voting record, he's pro-Trump more than most people, and pro-Trump agenda. But yet there's this connotation because he voted against this, but yet voted for all the Democrat bills prior, that he's some kind of enemy against Trump now. It's like, no, he's just trying to hold him accountable. But now you have Democrats out here openly going to shut down the government. House or Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer quite literally said it on the Senate floor that we're not voting for this. And what a lot of people don't know, and a lot of these large creators and large project, like the Lincoln Project put out, we were just talking about how they made this tweet about there's a majority in the Senate for the Republicans, but they're trying to claim that it's a Democrat shutdown. All the while gaslighting and not letting the full context of what's occurring in Senate happen, because they and I and that most Americans don't understand the procedural proceedings of Senate.
Yeah.
So they don't know what the filibuster is, right?
Yeah. How a simple majority isn't enough to get anything passed. You need that super majority to get anything passed without a filibuster.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're not at that super majority, so that filibuster is in effect, and those minority Democrats, well, still being a minority, are still 47% of the House, the Senate. So they can still block our bills. I mean, it might take a long time to get them passed, but it's not going to be as simple as done like that. So.
And for the listeners that don't understand what the filibuster is a procedural tool that the minority of the Senate usually uses to blockade a bill from passing, because what it does is it forces them, it's basically an unending debate of the bill itself until a motion to carry and end the filibuster comes up to play. But that's what happens is a cloture vote is then invoked. With a cloture vote, you need at least 60% of the Senate for it to then end the filibuster and move the bill forward. So the minority usually uses this so that way they can stalemate the bill itself until they can make their demands come forward, which is exactly what the Democrats are doing right now. And honestly, it's at the detriment of the American people.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not really much else I have to say. I mean, it's a mess. I mean, we won't really have any big news until next week because this all happens tomorrow. I mean, what changes to the bill will be made, if any at all will be made? It's up in the air. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, right now, I know that as of last night, they put the motion to the floor to end with the cloture, which I believe should happen sometime this morning or early this afternoon. Personally, I don't know if there's going to be enough. I think that the Democrats are going to force a shutdown, and from there, it's going to be a conversation with who can they make a deal with, I guess. Unfortunately, that's part of politics nowadays, even though deals shouldn't be made on the behest of the American people's dollar. But in all reality, that is how it operates, and from here, it's up in the air, honestly. That's the sad thing about it. I could see it going either way. Are there deals being made or conversations being had today with some of the Republicans? Because I do know that Rand Paul himself he sides with Thomas Massie. He's a no himself, so not even all of the Republicans are on board with it yet. So we first got to get him secured whether or not we can make some changes to it. Because Senate can submit changes and then pass it from that point, which is what the Democrats want to do. And then it'd go back to the House. They'd have to re-vote on it, make any changes they want, and then send it to the president. So there's still quite a bit of steps in this, but I just like the hypocrisy of the Democrats, because I find it hilarious that they do this, even though just not long ago, when they had the majority in the House or in the Senate, Chuck Schumer was crying about the filibuster, wanting to end the filibuster and make sure that it never was presented before. Because all of last year and the years prior, you sat here and saw the Democrats complaining about the filibuster, always grandstanding about, oh, let's get rid of the filibuster, but never actually did, because they knew eventually they would be the minority again.
Yeah.
It would be at their help to use it again, which they are.
Yeah, it's good press. You tell everyone the reason why we can't pass things is because of the filibuster. You still need to end the filibuster. Now you stop from arguing these bad policies to arguing this policy.
Mm-hmm.
And the filibuster, it's such a boogeyman of politics because it's always bad whenever your party's in power.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason, it's very easy to get people up in a frenzy. But it's undemocratic. It's against this institution. And, it really it's a nothing burger, really. Filibustering has been around for several years. It's been around for a long time, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So anybody that wants to follow that or pay attention to what's going on, because me personally, I always advocate go to the actual .govs. Don't listen to any of the .coms and most of the .orgs, because honestly, they're just most opinionated. So if you are familiar or are wanting to take a look at it a little bit further, it's HR 1968. You can go to congress.gov and look at that information and follow the actions, because they do update them pretty regularly on there. So that way you guys can see it. But a lot of different things have been happening on a global scale as well. So I know one of the big things right now is this whole Ukraine versus Russia and where the United States and even the EU stands in the situation. So what have you been hearing from it?
I mean, I've been hearing a lot of things. Russia has been, doing a lot of territory recaptures recently. I believe yesterday or a few days ago, Ukraine did do a small counteroffensive to recuperate some gains. But apart from that, Russia has been steadily gaining a lot of momentum in the war. Mm-hmm. I don't really think the U.S. continuing aid is really going to help Ukraine win this war. As Trump said, this war will not be won by them. It's about how much they're going to lose by at this point.
Right.
And by extension, I don't think we should put all our money onto Ukraine. They're going to be losing this war, and by saying that we want to side with them, it's a waste of resources. I mean, I've been saying this to a few of my friends and a few other people. I do believe the best course of action with American-Russian relations is a rapprochement. I believe Russia is a better ally than the Europeans would be in the coming decades. Unfortunately, Europe isn't really as important as it used to be 100 years ago. And as the center of the world moves over towards the Pacific Ocean, I believe an ally with Russia would be a better counter-deterrent or deterrent to the Chinese than the Europeans would. Because, I mean, as we saw in Iraq, the Europeans are very easy to just say, no, we don't want to get involved, and then they do nothing. But we get Russia up there. I mean, the Chinese are preoccupied with that immense land border right there. And that's not even accounting for the economic possibilities as well. Europe is similarly a very service-based economy, so opportunities for investment are a lot lower compared to somewhere where Russia, which has a lot more resources, natural resources, and where American companies could go in, start investing, help out both countries immensely. This whole mineral deal in Ukraine, you could say, yeah, it's worth $1 trillion, but how many more trillions of dollars are in Russia that can be, extracted and used for both countries' benefit?
And I believe that they're actually working on or just recently completed a mineral rights deal with Russia too, as well.
Yep. A lot of these rights, most of Ukraine's minerals are in the Donbass region, which, regardless of how the war goes, will be in Russia's control by the end of it. Unless Ukraine can push the Russians out, Donbass will be in Russian control by the end of the war. So whenever these mineral rights deals are talked about, Russia's going to own most of them regardless. So
now, when it comes to the geography of that, is that the Donbass area? Yes. I'm not very versed in it myself, but is that separate to Crimea, which I know has been the biggest?
Is separate.
Okay.
Crimea is the island underneath Ukraine, and then Donbass is the easternmost province of Ukraine that borders Russia. It has a very large Russian population, which is why they were fighting a low-intensity civil war for the past decade or so against the Ukrainians.
Right, and I know when it, like you had said again a moment ago, when it comes to having Russia as an ally, and more specifically on the trade side of things, would absolutely be more financially understandable for the United States, just because not only are they vastly bigger, they have a bigger network of trade, but when it comes to the things that we're after in Ukraine, natural gas, natural resource, minerals, things of that nature, Russia has an abundancy larger amount than Ukraine, so I can understand it from that aspect. And it would, I mean, when it comes between like the whole China situation, I know that China and Russia are technically in some ways allies, so trying to mitigate that situation, because I know when it comes to China, we have a whole lot of issues on ourselves. So that definitely makes a little bit more sense and could help us in the trade with them even.
Yeah. I mean, Russia and China aren't natural allies. They're allies of circumstance.
Right.
The reason the Russians and Chinese are, allies is because of the Americans and Europeans basically saying, we want to keep up the Cold War era politics. It's convenient to us to keep doing so, which, pushed Russia over to the Chinese camp. I believe if, we work to undo that, Russia has a better reason to ally with the Americans than the Chinese. I mean, you look at the Siberian border. There's millions of Chinese there for every thousands of Russians there. And, years from now, you could argue that a lot of this land could be given to the Chinese as, Chinese settlers move into the area. And Russia would be in no position to stop it, as they would have no other allies. So in the long term, it's better for both parties to reapproach each other. I think that's what Russia and the Americans are trying to do right now. I mean, you saw this with the Saudi Arabian talks, where we pretty much met up one-on-one, no Europeans, no Ukrainians, just Russians and Americans trying to talk it out. Because I don't know if you're aware, but for the past 4 years into the Biden administration, we basically cut off all diplomatic relations with the Russians. So Trump coming back into office is basically the reopening of said relations, which is crazy to think about. Even during the Cold War, when they were an adversary of ours, we still had communication with the Soviet Union. But now, a little border dispute over in Ukraine, cut off all communications with this major power.
And the funny thing about that is you can almost blame the Biden administration for the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, because even Ukraine, Zelensky himself told Biden not to remove the sanctions on Russia because that would give leeway for them to invade. So he was warned by Ukraine in itself. But over the last the last week or so, Russia has been making military advances, like you were saying, and so much so that they're actually surrounding the specific portion of where the Ukrainians are being held right now. And from what I understand, there's been over 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers that have already been either captured or surrendered. So, I mean, that's a huge blow to their military, which is already depleted numbers, because they're literally snatching men up from the streets.
The desertion rate is so bad right now that it's literally the policy for deserters isn't to kill them or send them to prison. It's to put them back on the front lines, because that's how bad it is. I believe it was around 10,000 men a month were being lost to desertion. And currently, Russian military policy is to take back the Kursk region, which is the little part of Russia that Ukraine tried to take. Because under current negotiations, Ukraine is saying that they're going to keep any land that they took from Russia. And since, we're getting close to finally getting a peace deal in the area, Russia is currently moving to take back as much of Kursk as possible, with even Vladimir Putin going down to Kursk himself to the front lines to kind of show the morale boost there. That here, if I'm down here with y'all, just know that we're taking this land back.
All right.
And once that's gone, I mean, Ukraine has no more bargaining chips to get any land back.
No, I mean, like I say, like when it comes to the surrounding, I believe just at the beginning of the week or over the weekend, Russia actually took some kind of tunnel, some oil tunnel, to the other side of where the Ukrainians were. So they're quite literally surrounding them now, and they were estimating that before the peace deal, the ceasefire that just came out, or they were attempting to come out with, they were going to basically end the war right there, which is what forced Zelensky and Ukraine to so quickly change heel and say, "Oh, let's get this ceasefire in place." But I guess taking a look at the local news or just the news in general, that kind of fell through.
Yeah, no, I mean, once again, Putin has no real incentive to do so. I mean, Trump's threatening sanctions, but at this point, the Russian economy is pretty sanction-proof. It's actually been growing instead of faltering ever since the sanctions, which is ironic. Excuse me. I really do think that the step forward is to, I don't even know, man, because the ceasefire doesn't make sense for either party. Ukraine wants to gain as much land as possible to negotiate with, and Russia has same deal. The more land they get, the more bargaining power they have. But long term, Ukraine will lose the war via attrition. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the local industry. And their economy is in shatters while their Russian economy is growing, which is completely out of this world if you think about it. How is the Russian economy growing under so many sanctions and things? Imagine these sanctions are lifted. Imagine what the Russian economy could be doing at that point.
Right.
So, I mean, long term, Russia benefits from continuing the war just because they will win the war of attrition and they'll have more land to negotiate with. Ukraine is in the exact opposite position where currently they lost a lot of land. They want to get all this land back, but they have no more ways of doing so. Europe isn't really going to do anything. The Americans are signaling that we will cut aid again, as we did for a little bit. So, I mean, I'm just saying, the Russo-Ukrainian war, it is going to end in a Russian victory, and it's just about how much they win by at this point.
And it seems like the EU, specifically the UK, isn't helping conversations at all. It's almost as if they're exacerbating the issue and making a little bit more tension to it, because just last week the Prime Minister of the UK came out and was telling people, insinuating that they were going to put actual troops on the ground in Ukraine and the front lines and planes in the air. So that to me seems like a red flag. And honestly, from my position when it comes to NATO, it's I take the position of the United States needs to remove itself from NATO because of this.
I mean, I understand that. And for all, in my personal belief, I do believe we've already put troops on the ground. Not officially, obviously, most likely in small numbers as observer units. And whenever we send those fighter jets to Ukraine, I mean, who do you think was flying those jets? Yeah, I mean, no one wants to say it, but those were, not Ukrainian pilots in those jets that we sent over.
Mm-hmm.
And by extension, I mean, Article 5, which is the main thing that would get us into war with Russia if one of our member states was attacked, isn't necessarily obligatory, as most people would say, believe. It pretty much says, in the event of one of our members being attacked, each state must act with what they deem appropriate response.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if Russia attacked the Baltics and we didn't want to get into a war, we could just deem an appropriate response at the least a strongly worded letter of aggression, oh, you can't do this, or straight up military action. That's the thing about Article 5. In theory, yeah, we all get into a war together, but in practice, we don't really need to.
Right. And I know one of the biggest things that's been over the last 24 hours is that the Russians haven't responded to this 30-day ceasefire. Well, it's actually being reported as of right now, as we're speaking, that Putin himself has responded and says he doesn't want a ceasefire. He wants long-term peace. So this whole deal of a ceasefire isn't even on his mind. He wants to get the war over with. So it's kind of like in the court of Ukraine of hey, do you really want peace, or do you just want this, short little extension of no war, basically?
Yeah, I mean, well, militarily, the ceasefire benefits Ukraine more than the Russians. Right now, the Russians have the organization, they have the material, and they have the manpower. Despite, the media, what they want to say about the conflict, Russia hasn't resorted to conscription yet. In fact, a lot of their programs are volunteer-based, and if you look at their advertisements, their military pay is much higher than a lot of their normal contract pay for the average job. So because of that, they've had very good success with recruiting more men into the military. Maybe short term for now, where it's like 2-year contracts, but regardless, they don't have a manpower issue like Ukraine does. They have more material, they have more drones, they have more artillery pieces, more armored vehicles, more aircraft. They have more of everything than Ukraine.
Right.
And in a ceasefire situation where they got a month of no fighting, you could say that, oh yeah, but they got a little break from the fighting. That doesn't matter. They're winning the war in every way that you can describe it. And Ukraine would use that time to reorganize, rearm, and pretty much get ready to fight again. I mean, it's genuinely funny. I mean, Ukraine currently, instead of reinforcing battalions to current strength, they just make new ones. So you have all of these battalions fighting in Ukraine, which normally would be thousands of men strong, but no, they're just hundreds, because instead of reinforcing them or consolidating them, they keep them independent and small.
Right.
So Ukraine would, in this situation, use that time to reorganize their military into a more cohesive fighting force, which Russia knows is only going to drag the war out longer as Ukraine has more of a chance to fight back.
Right, absolutely, especially if there actually is any kind of reinforcement from the EU. But moving it a little bit closer back to home, I know that there's been a lot of talks with the stock market and more specifically the trade war, quote unquote, with Canada. China, you just mentioned a moment ago, actually entered this whole trade war, if that's what you want to call it, and now they're even going after Canada. So it's a little bit of an interesting development there. I don't know if you've heard about it, but Canada was boasting about how we don't need the United States, even though we make up nearly 77% of their entire economy. But they said that now all of our trade that was going to the United States is now going to China. Ha. Well, just a few days ago, China was like, you know what, 100% tariff. I mean, it's just, and then that kind of forced Canada back to the table with us, because now they're like, oh crap, we ain't got nothing to do now, because that was our last chance, because that's our close outside of the United States. They're the closest people we have, because we don't have the infrastructure or the logistics to move these products like we do to the United States.
Yeah, I mean, a land border is so much easier to move things through, and for Canada's case, they are basically our unofficial 51st state. They might have radically different policies and culture than us, but regardless, they are a very close economic partner of the U.S. Mm-hmm. These tariffs, I mean, I'm conflicted on them, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. I don't, because I've heard arguments from both sides, and I'm trying to figure out which one's the right one. Mm-hmm. As a finance major and a very big follower in economics, I believe the tariffs are a horrible way to stimulate the economy. I believe that the economy will sort itself out. If there's more efficient methods of production somewhere else, that's where the economy will base out of. And through these efficiencies, we create more value as resources are allocated better rather than wasted in inefficient processes. However, I also realize that a lot of these more efficient manufacturing locations use government intervention to make them artificially more efficient. So it's a balancing act for me. On one hand, these tariffs seek to diminish that government intervention in other countries. For example, China, the big reason why they were able to manufacture so many things so cheaply wasn't because they were just better at making things than we were. It's because the government paid these people money to artificially be more profitable than American companies. So with that government intervention, these tariffs make a little bit more economic sense, because now we're just making our industries equal to these other industries. And in some instances, just better than them as well, because we are better at manufacturing a lot of things. But if we don't have that comparative advantage from these government subsidies or tariffs, it doesn't matter, because the other country can just pay their companies to be profitable, because they are somewhat more controlling of their economy than the U.S. is. But regardless, that adds my conflict there, because it's like free market versus understanding that the rest of the world doesn't operate on a free market.
Right, and I understand that aspect. I find it interesting, though, your confliction with the tariff itself. So just kind of playing the devil's advocate here with you for a minute, just to pick your brain. So prior to the 1913, Federal Reserve Act and the implementation of taxation, that was the only thing that funded the United States was tariffs. So if we were able to do it even under just, pitchfork and candlelight, why wouldn't we be able to do it in a day and age where we are now?
I mean, 1913 wasn't really that far back, if you really think about it. at that point we had airplanes, we had global shipping, we had railroads connecting a lot of the world. It was a very globalized time. We had trade going to China, we had trade going to the Europeans, all over the world. Only difference is back then the global south was still a lot more resource based, resource extraction based. I mean, South America is the exception. They were actually industrializing at a very good pace. If I remember correctly, the figures were that around the 1900s, Argentina had a per capita GDP equal to that of the U.S. actually, because their economy was growing just as well as the Americans was. Up until World War I, that is the case. But I do believe, like, even back then when tariffs paid for most of our economy, that was just because of the way the economies worked. The British, the French, a lot of these colonial powers had a lot of their raw resources coming in from these colonies. So they didn't need as much global trade to, work their economies. But now where that's no longer the case, we don't have empires anymore, at least officially, where we can just take resources from these colonies and bring them to the home country. Tariffs make a lot less sense now because now you have to compete for these resources. You have to be the reason why they come sell them over here. They have to be the cheapest place to buy them, or the most, you can get the best price for these products. And tariffs artificially mess with that whole system. Because, I mean, as you said, we had no taxation in the U.S. Because, well, we were an efficient, self-contained economy. Just like the UK and France, they didn't have taxes within their empire. They kind of just transport everything as needed. They taxed the companies, but they didn't tax the products as much. And that's kind of the world we found ourselves in. Instead of those empires being regional, now they're all over the world. These resources are within countries that they have to trade for now. And now that whole argument of no more tariffs, because back then we didn't have any, wasn't really valid. Because now we're competing with every other country for these resources and products.
Okay. And so because you're saying that the implementation of taxation, it kind of like butts heads with the whole tariff system, right?
I would say that the resources that we would have tariffed back then are under a lot more competition now than they were back then.
Okay.
There's a lot more manufacturing bases around the world. There's a lot more resource points around the world. And by extension, there's a lot more competition for said resources around the world. And by adding these tariffs, you artificially make yourself less viable for trade, by extension, less viable economically, and by extension, once again, less viable for investment and economic growth.
But we have seen where tariffs have been implemented, even just within this administration, or as in Trump's first administration, when he did implement that, you saw a lot of manufacturing, a lot of food industry, and a lot of industry in general, doesn't matter what specific sector, but come to America. And that's what we're starting to see, especially with a lot of two of the fastest growing food distributors in Canada. The day that he announced back in January, those had already were making plans that day to stop their production in Canada and move to the United States. So in that aspect, it would actually help our GDP because it's being made here, and those companies would make a little bit more money in the sense that, they don't have the distribution or even the tariff itself. So from that aspect, what's your take on that?
Well, the issue is retaliatory tariffs, where like we tariff someone to tariff us back, and at that point we lose those exports as well. As you can probably guess, the U.S. is very self-sufficient with a lot of its products, and for that reason we export a lot of products to the world every year. And the issue is when these jobs or products aren't exported as much. As you probably guess, we're a major food exporter in the world. Unfortunately, we are a very fat country. Yes, that's a good thing because we're very wealthy because of that fact, but at the same time, there's arguments to be made on both sides. But regardless, we do export a lot of crucial goods. What happens is because of these retaliatory tariffs, where Canada, Mexico, China tariffs us back, now American jobs back at home are hurt because they can't sell as much of the product, and they're going to have to do layoffs, cut jobs, because they don't need as much production. They already satisfy local domestic demand, but now that international demand's lower because of retaliatory tariffs, they have to cut jobs because they don't need as much product anymore.
Now, I can understand that from a superpower like Russia or China, but when you're in control of somebody's economy as we are, or have a stranglehold on the economy like Mexico or Canada in itself, like the United States has, it kind of gives leeway to like, hey, do what we want, or else, your entire economy could collapse.
For sure. And at the end of the day, that's why Canada and Mexico are walking back the threats of tariffs, why likewise America is rolling back a lot of its big threats against them for tariffs. But you see this with China or the Europeans, where instead of, reducing them, they double down. I mean, as you said earlier, 100% tariffs on a lot of Canadian goods. Europe, I believe they did a really funny thing where they taxed our whiskey, and now we're thinking of taxing back their wine. And it just keeps escalating further and further, causing both economies to suffer at the end of it because more inefficient methods of production are caused when they had no reason to. This all started because of, strategic resources like steel, aluminum, that are important for the U.S. to produce domestically. But now we're taxing wine and whiskey. And that's the issue with tariffs. They start off with, a somewhat reasonable idea that we need to control our strategic resources, but it shifts into let's tax everything to tell them to back off of the stuff we care about.
And I mean, to put this a little bit more in perspective, a lot of people think, oh, this just has to do with trade and Donald Trump just wants more money. It's like, yeah, I mean, obviously, from a global aspect of trade, the United States has been kind of being ripped off in a way, seeing as we are the largest consumer by far, and it's not even close. But it's the simple fact of there are certain things that we are doing that the rest of the world aren't. Like especially when it comes to Europe and the UK and all that situation, when it comes to things of funding NATO and all these other aspects, which is what the main issue that Donald Trump has with that country. And this is his tactic of saying, hey, y'all need to make a step up. And, some of the movements that he's been doing with Ukraine as well is also an aspect of how he's forcing the UK to really step up because over the last 4 years, we know that the president, on this weak foreign policy, these people were able to take advantage of the United States. And it's kind of from that aspect that the United States is like, hey, we're not weak no more. You've been taking advantage of us not only in trade, but on all these other aspects when it comes to funding of NATO and all these other areas. It's like, it's your turn to do something. And if you don't, we're going to attack you this way.
I mean, it's like you said. I mean, we're pretty much just following up a lot of common sense things. NATO not paying their fair share, the Europeans trying to beat us economically because of the fact they don't have to pay for their military. They can afford all these different welfare programs, all these different subsidies, while the Americans have to pretty much run a deficit every year to afford half as much because of our military spending and our guarantees to all the world through various agencies. I mean, U.S. aid being one of them. Our donations, if you will, to the UN. Yeah. I mean, we give a lot of money to the world, and the world doesn't give us much back. So
no, not at all. And that's part of the problem is if the left or Americans in general, because I know there's people on the right that complain about our defense budget all the time.
Yeah.
If they knew where the majority of that went, they would absolutely be okay with understanding, oh, we need to reduce federal spending because a large portion of our defense program goes to all these other countries, a lot of the EU countries, and that's why they're not able to pay for their defense because we are.
Exactly.
And if they understood that, they'd understand where Donald Trump is coming from, which is why I try and promote all the time. It's like, read the actual bills, guys. Read the legislation coming out. See where the money's being allocated. Don't just take Trump and what he's saying for what the media says that he's saying, but listen to what he's saying and cross-reference it where our money is going. Follow the money, and then you'll understand why Donald Trump is doing what he's doing, especially with the EU and Canada.
Yeah, I mean, that's really the big thing. It's such a complicated process, and it's so much easier to just say, here, Trump is bad because tariffs are hurting the stock market. But if you don't really understand why it's happening, you don't understand how this all, in the end, might benefit the U.S. I mean, I won't be one to deny the fact that these tariffs can help domestic production. They will help promote industries. But the issue is long-term.
Right.
What happens when the tariffs eventually do subside and we get rid of them? I mean, I think it's not idiotic to say that we will get rid of these tariffs eventually. They're not going to be here for all eternity.
Right.
So what's going to happen then? I mean, if our industries aren't as naturally competitive as these other ones, eventually they're going to be in the same position that they were years ago, where they, close out their doors because there's no reason to keep them here anymore.
And I can understand that aspect of it, but I when it comes from Donald Trump being the businessman that he is, you have CEOs of Goldman Sachs and all these other things that are actually excited about the policies. I mean, these are the largest financial firms in America who just months ago was like, I don't know about Donald Trump, but now they've completely reverted course and saying, hey, this is a president that's actually working with the business sector, something we haven't seen over the last 4 years in the level that he's at. So it allows them to get a little bit more excited. A lot of people, like you said just a moment ago when it was coming to the stock, a lot of people are freaking out about it because the tariffs really are affecting the up and down of the stock market right now. But honestly, people don't understand the tactics in which that happens. I mean, they weren't complaining about the 4 or 5 times that the stock market did the exact thing that it's doing right now last year under Biden, but because it's Trump, now they want to complain about it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's real funny because I decided to get into the stock market a week or two ago, which,
oof. Well, man, it might have been a good time because all the prices are down.
Exactly. So in theory, it's good. But I mean, if I ever wanted to liquidate in the short term,
yeah,
it's good. But once everything does stabilize, with God's help, hopefully in a month or so,
yeah, absolutely,
I'll be up a lot of money, thankfully. But I mean, the stock market is such a fickle thing. It isn't really the best representation of an economy by itself, but it is a good indicator of how well the companies are doing. Because at the end of the day, it's a combination of the valuation of all the companies. So. Right. Stock market's doing well. That means the companies are doing well. Stock market's doing bad. That means companies are doing well. But just as you said earlier, it goes up and down. So a company can be doing good today and do bad tomorrow and vice versa. Right. So, I mean, as long as the tariffs are taken care of and the trade goes back to being how it's supposed to be, there shouldn't be an issue long term. But, I mean, my thing is, I'm, like I said, conflicted. Tariffs are such a 50-50 because on one hand, domestic production is strategically better. More tax revenue, more jobs, more security as well from foreign trade disruptions, whether that be pandemics, war, or terrorism. If it's local here in the U.S., it won't affect the average consumer. If anything, it makes prices go down because now there's less product being sent overseas. But on the other hand, economic inefficiencies, economic recessions, and above all, I just don't see how this compares to subsidizing the industry rather than tariffing it, because I think you know the difference between the two, right? Subsidizing versus tariffs, where tariffs would be taxing foreign industries, while subsidizing would be giving money to domestic ones to increase production. Right. I mean, what do you think in this would have been a better thing to do, subsidizing or tariffing?
Well, I mean, subsidizing can also lead to increased debt of the United States, which would be counterintuitive to the whole Trump administration in itself. So. But see, that's the problem is a lot of people hyper-focus on one particular area. Oh, he's just looking at tariffs. Like, no, you got to look at it from the grand scheme of things. It's not just the tariffs. Tariffs are one aspect of his economic strategy. You also have the reduced spending through DOGE. You have the Festivus report. You have areas where they have to look and make sure that the reduction in spending. It's a financial literacy thing that Donald Trump's doing. And honestly, when it comes to tariffs, specifically to answer your question, if it wasn't somebody other than Donald Trump, like if it was Joe Biden, somebody that doesn't understand business, obviously, then I would have a problem because it's like you don't really do business on a normal basis, so you don't see the ins and outs of these negotiations. Yeah. Donald Trump, though, he's versed in it. I mean, he made billions of dollars off of these types of negotiations, so I trust what he's doing because I was able to see what he did in his first term. And how the manufacturing came back, how the auto industry went booming. And again, just last year, we lost 111,000 manufacturing jobs just last year under Joe Biden. However, in the first month of Donald Trump, we gained back 10,000. So we are already seeing the return of the dividend on this. For instance, a lot of people are complaining about egg prices. They're complaining about the inflation rate. All of that is down. The egg prices nationally when he took office was $6.60. Now it's $5.18 the last time I looked. When we looked at the inflation rate when he took office, it was well over 3%. It's at 2.8. And the business trends in regards to how everything's running, especially with the mineral rights deals and the tariffs situation seems to be paying off because both Canada and Mexico have already backed off and folded in a lot of different ways. We're starting. Economists are actually predicting to see over the next month or so the inflation rate go even under 2%. So it's one of those things of I understand where you're coming from, but I also know we have a business guru who's in charge of it all.
For sure. And, as you said, business guru, he had a great track record under his first administration up until COVID. So, barring any major catastrophe, I mean, right. I'm just hoping everything works out. And as, we said earlier with the whole Ukraine situation with those mineral rights, I mean, second that war's done, it looks like we will be getting a very nice mineral deal from either party. So that should give it a big boost to the economy that, who knows, could possibly even offset the tariffs that we're receiving right now.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing is a lot of people are freaking out about, all of this, and even the media's fear mongering about it and saying, "Oh, we're heading for a recession." It's like, how can you even make that determination when we're not even through the first quarter yet? It's like, do you know what the definition of a recession is? It's 2 consecutive quarters of job loss and loss in GDP. We're not even through the first, but they've already started the fear-mongering on it because of the stock market. It's like, did you guys fear-monger about it last year when it happened 4 separate times?
Yep, and I mean, that's unfortunately the case, and this fear does show itself in the stock market. People stop being as confident with their choices. They're going to start hoarding a lot more money. They're not going to be spending as much as they normally would, which never really hurts the economy than if they weren't scared at all. And that's really the unfortunate case. All this fear does damage the economy more than if you could even argue some of these tariffs would, because if there's less Americans buying American goods, then what's the point of these tariffs if no one's buying these products that we're making anymore?
Right, and I can understand that aspect, but I know that we do also have a lot of influx of investments from around the world, but also from companies that are already here. I mean, you've got Apple that's investing just here in Texas, over in Austin, another $500 billion, which is estimated to bring about 20 or 30,000 jobs here. Honda is investing more into Indiana with their new EV line coming out. They were going to be doing it where they're, I believe, in Mexico, but they brought it and said, hey, we're going to do it here. So it's, like I say, it's not just one aspect. You need to look at it when it comes to just tariffs, but you also have to look at the tax promises that Donald Trump has given to these companies to reinvest into America. That's why you're seeing well over $2 trillion being promised over the next 2 years to be invested into our economy.
Speaking of taxes and bringing to the U.S., you heard about Trump's proposal for the gold visa, if you will?
Ah, yeah.
I mean, I'm guessing that's yes.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that whole situation?
So I don't have a problem with it because honestly, the dollar amount that he's putting on it will actually help a little bit. But I mean, if you have the funds and you go through the proper channels, I have no problem with it. If they make it easier for individuals that have the money, then sure. Because a lot of these other countries, there's countries that, the process is much longer and much more expensive than even coming to the United States. The United States has one of the fastest and cheapest ways to become a citizen out in the entire world. So I have no problem with it. But what's your take?
Yeah, no, I mean, I find it very interesting, frankly. I mean, one of the big reasons why it costs so much is the benefit where you don't get taxed on foreign income, which I saw as very interesting. Like, oh, wow, American citizens don't get that benefit, but if you pay for the citizenship premium, you get that benefit. So that was a little bit interesting, but I see the reason why. It's to encourage, wealthier people to come to the U.S. since they won't be getting taxed on their main source of income. But by extension, they pay, it's basically a club fee. You get all these benefits, but, you have to pay an entrance fee, which is the $5 million.
I believe. I was just about to say, I think it's like $5 million. But honestly, people are like, well, they're just selling it. It's like, well, yes and no. They still have to go through the same process that anybody would when it comes to naturalization or becoming a citizen. They got to take the test. They got to do these things, but it's just a quicker pace.
Yeah.
And honestly, it helps. I mean, $5 million doesn't seem like a whole lot outside of that, but you got to think about these wealthy individuals that can afford that. What are they going to bring with them? What kind of business, what kind of influx to the GDP in our economy can they bring? If you're able to just shell out $5 million here and there, obviously you've got some business behind you.
Exactly. I mean, and think about what we could do with just one of these people. I mean, we could buy 5 years worth of kazoo orchestras right there with that. I don't know if you're aware, but we were paying $1 million for a kazoo orchestra here in the U.S., which...
Some of the expenses that we have been finding is absolutely ridiculous, and I just like millions of dollars just to gear up a Sesame Street for Iraq. It's nonsensical, and these are the things that people are complaining about when it comes to cutting. And they'll sit here and they'll say, "Oh, they're doing it the wrong way," but are they really? I mean, like. You see something that says, hey, we're sending, I think it was like $50 billion to Iraq, or $1 million to Iraq to start up a Sesame Street show. It's like, do we really need that?
Yeah.
Like, how does that benefit us as Americans?
What you don't understand. It's the American culture we're exporting. It's so important that we just spend all this money because, foreign countries don't get enough American culture already.
Which is funny because you say we're trying to export the American way, but yet everybody that way is saying death to America. We don't want anything to do with your westernized culture. I find it ironic all at the same time.
Yeah, we give money to people who hate us. That is the American way, unfortunately. We're too nice to the world.
You got to love it. You got to love it. But, well, thank you guys all for allowing me to be here with you. I'm Brian, and then Patrick. Hopefully your travels are safe and you have a great time with your family on spring break.
You know, I warned the guy. I said, you mess with the banks, they're going to get you. And that's the reason he's not here today.
Oh.
Well, the cover story is that spring break. Unfortunately, I told him, you owe the bank money, they're going to get you. I said, you're not going to be here next week. I wasn't joking.
I don't plan to be here next week, so hopefully, Patrick, you come back. But, I mean, I'm always welcome, and you guys are always welcome on the Legislative Lounge on Saturdays. So, but again, thank you for allowing me to be here today, and we appreciate everybody for joining us. Brian, do you have any last words?
No, I mean, it was a pleasure having you. It was great talking to you. A very nice change of pace from the usual shenanigans me and Patrick get up to. But, hopefully, he takes this time to reassess his relationship with the banks. So hopefully they allow him to come back.
Absolutely. And maybe one day we can collab at the four of us and do a show. So
for sure. That'd be a lot of fun.
Thank you guys for joining in today, and we'll see you guys next week, Thursday at 10 a.m.